How many roster spots do the Spurs have available? And who are some unsigned free agents that would fit with San Antonio? Let's find out. All right, so I want to go through where the Spurs currently stand with their roster and looking at some of their open roster spots. So I had put up an emergency pod when the Spurs had traded for Kelly Olynyk, so that's over on the spotupshot.com. It's over on the Spot Up Pod's YouTube feed and also all the podcast channels. Then the Spurs re-signed Jordan McLaughlin recently. He officially re-signed on Saturday to a veteran. We're expecting a veteran minimum contract. The contract details have not returned. So I'll just talk about McLaughlin real quick because I didn't talk about him here on the Spot Up Pod. So McLaughlin should have a similar role to last season where he's one of the reserve guards on the roster, where he's basically only going to come into a game most likely if one of the guards is in foul trouble, if someone gets hurt during a game or it's for several games, or if the game's already decided where it's in blowout territory where the Spurs are either ahead or behind in the game. Bringing McLaughlin back, he's a veteran who knows the Spurs' system after spending a few months with San Antonio. He also has some on-court chemistry with some of the players from last season's team that he got to play with for a few months there. And then also, again, he only signed most likely for a veteran minimum, which is $3 million. So, again, he's not having he's back as a veteran there on a veteran minimum salary, so he's not really impacting the cap sheet too much, especially that the Spurs are pretty far under the luxury tax and under the first apron hard cap. Now, the Spurs, with McLaughlin back, do have 13 players on standard NBA contracts, and that means that they have 2 open standard NBA roster spots. They also don't technically right now have any players signed to two-way contract spots, so that means they have 3 openings on the two-way roster as well. And I do want to note that I'm recording this as of July 13th, Sunday evening, in case things change. So with those 2 open roster spots, the Spurs, at least by opening night, they most likely need to fill one of those spots to get to at least the minimum of 14 players on standard contracts. And then, like I said, they have those 3 open two-way spots. So what I want to focus on first is talking about those 2 standard roster spots that they have right now. So here are the players they have at each position right now on the roster. So what I'm calling ball handling guards, players who initiate the offense, kind of bring the ball up the floor, get the team into their sets. There is De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, and now McLaughlin has been re-signed. So again, they have 4 ball handling guards, I would say, on the roster. So they have they have a lot of depth there at the guard spot. On the wing position, they have Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, and Julian Champagnie. Amongst forwards, they have Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, and Carter Bryant. And then amongst bigs, they have, of course, Wemby, Luke Cornett, and Kelly Olynyk. So again, they have about, for each of those positions, guards, wings, forwards, and bigs, they have about 3 players per position right now. So again, we'll see what position they look for, with those last 2 roster spots, considering that they already have a lot of guards on the roster. So what financial tools do they have to sign these players or acquire them in trades? They have $3.1 million left of the non-tax MLE that was mainly used to sign Luke Cornett for $11 million in year 1 of his first-year contract. They also have the full $5.1 million biannual exception. I do want to note that if they use that exception, then next offseason in the summer 2026, they do not get that exception back. They can't use it again until 2027. And then also, of course, they still have veteran minimum contract exceptions as well to use on veteran minimum players. So who are some players that fit, for those last 2 spots? I wrote a piece back on July 10th called The Spurs' Open Roster Spots, where I looked at some players that were still available. Again, as of July 13th, Sunday evening, these players have not signed with other teams either, so they're still available as far as unsigned free agents. So one thing to note about these free agents is that if they're going to be signing with San Antonio, they're most likely looking at a reserve role where they're probably not going to be in the 10-man rotation, or if they want to get in the 10-man rotation, they got to compete with some players who maybe some minutes they can take from, such as off the bench, like Julian Champagnie, maybe Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sohan, and of course Carter Bryant's going to be there fighting for minutes as well. So in terms of guards, they're pretty much set at the guard position, but they've had a standout guard in the summer league, and his name is David Jones Garcia. So again, there's an option to bring Garcia in on a standard contract. If they do that, then his likely role would be a reserve guard on the bench for the Spurs. But he could try to challenge Champagnie for some minutes as the backup shooting guard there off the bench. And so what it would take to sign Garcia, most likely a veteran minimum contract. So David Jones Garcia is there as the player that I see it would be a good fit at the guard role. As far as wings, there's Garrison Matthews of the Atlanta Hawks. He's still unsigned right now. His role would be a reserve wing, coming off the bench. If he really wants to get minutes, he probably has to challenge Julian Champagny or Keldon Johnson for some minutes off the wing. He's a shooter from outside, is Matthews. His contract projection I have is a veteran minimum to $4 million range. I just will say, I think for him, he'd probably want to find a spot where there's not so many other wing players in front of him to get some minutes. And then there's also Johnny Juzang, who I think would be a good fit with the Spurs. He recently played with the Utah Jazz. They had waived him or didn't guarantee his contract. So his role would also be a reserve wing. He'd probably sign for the veteran minimum. And for Juzang, I think he would, as a young player, he'd probably understand that he'd probably be, in a reserve role, only coming into games when a wing, gets into foul trouble, there's an injury, or a game's pretty much decided. Then there's some forwards I wrote down here. So first is Amir Coffey, formerly of the Clippers. His role would be a reserve wing or forward. He could challenge Champagny, Keldon, and Sohan for some minutes. I have his range as a low amount of veteran minimum to a high amount of $5.1 million, which is the biannual exception. Again, for someone like Coffey, I think that he wants to go to a situation where there's not so many players ahead of him in the depth chart, so where he wants to get some minutes. So again, I don't see Coffey as likely as maybe someone like Johnny Juzang. Then there's Caleb Houstan out of the formerly of the Orlando Magic. His role would also be a reserve wing, a shooter from outside. He could try to challenge Julian Champagny for minutes, but again, most likely a reserve role for Houston. Maybe come in for spot situations when the Spurs need to space the floor. His contract projection looks like veteran minimum is what I'm seeing here. And then Riley Minix, currently on the Spurs' Summer League team and formerly on a two-way contract. If the Spurs want to bump him up to a standard roster spot, I could totally see that. So his role would be a reserve role for forwards in case they need an option to spread the floor. Or, again, if they need an extra forward on the roster. And I really just think he feels more so that Mamu role, the Sandro Mamukelashvili role, where he comes in spot situations, or if there's some injuries, he can come in and fill some minutes for a certain number of games. And for someone like Riley Minix, they could probably his contract projection looks like the veteran minimum. And then lastly, bigs, again, they have a lot of bigs already. They have Kelly Olynyk, they have Victor, they have Luke Cornett. So I think just a veteran leadership kind of guy here. Bismack Biyombo, who had some experience with the Spurs last year to end the season. His role, he kind of understands that he's probably not going to play at all unless, again, there's a situation where someone's in foul trouble or there's an injury. So again, he would just be a good reserve big for the locker room, bring that veteran leadership, come in when he needs to, and then also to sign him, you could sign him for a veteran minimum contract. So again, those are some players that I think that are still out there, still unsigned free agents, and some players on the Summer League squad that could fit with San Antonio in those last two reserve roles. As far as the two-way spots, the Spurs do have 3 open two-way spots. Riley Minix and Harrison Ingram do have qualifying offers to return to the Spurs on two-way contracts. All they have to do is sign those qualifying offers, and they get to come back to the Spurs as two-way players. But maybe they're seeing if they can try to earn a standard roster spot. Let's just say that Minix and Ingram do sign their qualifying offers, and they end up returning to San Antonio as two-way players. Well, then that means the Spurs have 1 open two-way spot left. Here, I think that spot could either go to David Jones Garcia if the Spurs don't want to sign him to a standard roster spot, or let's say they do sign Jones Garcia, or somebody else signs Jones Garcia. Then I think another player who's kind of stood out at Summer League is Jameer Nelson Jr. Maybe give him that final two-way spot there. So again, that's just a quick look at the open spots the Spurs currently have. Again, 2 standard roster spots are open, and 3 open two-way spots. And again, as of Sunday evening, those are the vacancies on the roster. We'll see how they fill those spots out as the offseason progresses. Thanks for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button.